Welcome. Good morning. It is a beautiful morning in Tar Heel land. Desmond Johnson, RL Bynum, special guest host Pete Chilcutt in the house. Bleav in Hills Hoops. We're going to review the past week in Carolina basketball. And of course, we'll get you ready for Saturday's Big Tilt regular season finale against those Duke Blue Devils down in Cameron. Let's get it. So we're here for a brand new edition of Bleav in Hills Hoops here on the Bleav Podcast Network. I'm your host, Desmond Johnson, again joined by RL Bynum from the Tar Heel Tribune and former Carolina big man Pete Chilcutt, special guest host in the house again with us this week. Great week for the Heels. Beat our tribal NC State 79-70, a back and forth game, and then take out last night Notre Dame pretty spectacularly in the Dean Dome on senior night. Still a little confused as to who are the seniors and who aren't on this team, because like half the team got honored, it felt like at some point. But we'll get to all that in a little bit. And of course, we got a little game going on Saturday, part two of the greatest rivalry in sports, in my opinion, North Carolina versus Duke. Carolina clinched at least a share of the regular season title with the win over Notre Dame last night. If Duke beats Carolina, then there's a tiebreaker scenario where we'll have to go through those things. So RL just wrote about that in the Tar Heel Tribune. You can check that out over there at their site. He'll give us a little insight in what that means, how that works. And we'll look at the rest of the ACC. The ACC is self-destructing, I guess, is the best word to use it after you get past Carolina and Duke, because even Virginia threw up a couple of stinkers, really, it feels like recently. We'll just look at that little pack of teams right underneath Carolina and Duke and try to figure out how many teams are going to make the NCAA tournament, because I don't know at this point who deserves to go at this point. So we get all that and more. Of course, we're live. If you have any comments or things you want to mention about the Tar Heels or the upcoming Duke matchup or anything you saw this past week, just mention it in the comment section on Facebook Watch or on the YouTube section, the message section at youtube.com/@Tobacco Road Sports Radio. Gentlemen, how are you doing this morning? Feeling good after a win last night?
Doing great. Yep.
Yeah, that was a fun senior night. That's for sure.
That was a fun senior night. I had to watch it on delay because I had a high school baseball game at 7 that I was calling. So I got home and then started watching it right around 9. So I ended up finishing it late. But yeah, that was just like a tidal wave after a certain point. They had like 2 or 3 runs of just 13, 15, 18-3 or whatever, where they just literally just pulled away. And when Harrison Ingram and Cormac Ryan are shooting well, and you're getting points from off the bench, I don't know if there's a better team in the country than Carolina, because it feels like their defense is kind of back from where it was before. What do you think about the defense you've seen the past 2 games?
Well, I mean, you go back to starting in 1982, every UNC national championship team, maybe with the exception of 2009, turned up the defense in March, and you're really seeing that from this team. I mean, that's some of the best defense I've seen since the 10-game win streak. I mean, kept Notre Dame off the three-point arc. They challenged all the shots. Defenders kept the ball in front of them. They dove for loose balls. They got into passing lanes. And Marcus Burton, I think it was 3rd time this season he's been held to single digits thanks to some terrific defense from R.J. Davis and Seth Trimble. And Ryan was impressive on defense as well.
I think you feel like he was jacked up to play Notre Dame last night, didn't it? Like he had a little more juice, like in his rebounding and just his shots and everything else. Just a little bit extra from him last night, which I loved. Keep that. Keep that every game.
Notre Dame was they were a tough team to guard. I thought that they were really aggressive on the one-on-one, but they weren't taking bad shots. They were making some good passes off those, and like RL said, it was impressive to do so well against that offense. I think give that team a couple more years with that coach, I think they're going to be pretty good in the ACC.
So Carolina defeats Notre Dame last night, 84-51. The lead got up to was it like 35 or something like that at some points in this game. 38 was the high mark.
38,
yeah. So it got really ugly in the second half, really in particular. Notre Dame did not score for like the first 5 or 6 minutes of the second half. They were stuck on 25, which is where they were at halftime, as Carolina just started pulling away. And it got to the point where you just kind of knew, okay, this has gotten out of hand a little bit. I'm trying to figure out who I would say was the best player last night, but everybody played really well. Ingram had 11 points and 14 rebounds. He got hot for a little bit. Cormac ended up with 14 points. Armando ended up with
14.
And Tay Davis led Notre Dame with 11 points. They just couldn't get anything going until the 13:56 mark of the second half. That's a long time to go without a goal. And Jim Boeheim was on the broadcast and kept mentioning it over and over again. He was just like, Carolina's too good defensively. Like, they're just too good for Notre Dame to really do anything. Some nights you just can't do anything about that. They're just a better team defensively. And I want to make a case for Armando Bacot, first team All ACC. Because I think we've kind of moved away from him being on there because his scoring is lower, but his defense is way better this year. Like, I think he's the anchor. He's the reason why they can play defense the way they can. Because a lot of college basketball teams today, they don't have a rim protector. Like, we're going over to go see Duke on Saturday, right? Who's the rim protector for Duke?
They don't have one.
They don't have one. Like, and that's really their weakness. Like, when they run across, we're a bad matchup for Duke. Like, when I look at our roster and I look at theirs, and I think back to the first game, they don't match up well with what we can do, and especially coming off the bench. And not just one big man. I mean, now you've got Jalen Washington that's grown into this role coming off the bench, where you can honestly give Bacot spells and give him rest. And there's not a lot of drop-off when Washington comes in defensively. There was a lot of blocks down in the paint. I saw that Carolina leads in defensive rebounding. They're first in the ACC, almost 30 a game. 3-point percentage defensively, they're first in the ACC, right under 30%. That's telling me that you can't really drive on them. The guards are staying in front of you. They're wooing you into bad 3-point shots, because a lot of times I'll see teams just get 3-point heavy and just start shooting it, like NC State did the other night, and just can't hit anything. And Duke was the same way. It was the first game we saw them. Do you feel like it's truly the Carolina defense, or do you think it's bad shooting? Because let's admit, some of these teams can't shoot as well as they think they can, and they're shooting a bunch of threes, Steph Curry style. Like, is it a mix of both? Or what are you seeing when you watch today's basketball or today's game?
Yeah, it's a little bit. In that first 10-game stretch, I think they got maybe a little bit too much credit for their excellent 3-point defense. I think some of those teams were off. But by and large, their defense is much improved. They are in them for sure, and contesting most of those shots. The problem is a lot of these teams want those shots these days. So it's like Syracuse wanted those tough shots. They were hitting them. Duke is going to be perimeter oriented for a lot of the game. It's going to be a challenge. Did a great job against Duke the first time, running them off that line, making them drivers. But it is one of the team's strengths for sure to step up defensively. Last night, especially those three guards, including Seth, just came in and I thought really dominated from the perimeter and made those guys into drivers and made them take tough shots. That's the key to this team success so far.
All right, what are your thoughts?
Against Duke, it's just going to be without Derek Lively in there. Bacot should have a big game.
Yeah.
But you'll have to note that Sean Stewart has started to play well off the bench late.
I was going to mention him, because he wasn't.
Yeah, he only played 2 minutes.
Okay.
He only played 2 minutes in the first meeting against State. He had 12 points, 4 offensive rebounds, 3 blocks, 2 steals. So he was a non-factor in the first game, and he's going to be a player who Carolina is going to have to deal with in the scouting report.
I was going to ask about him because I was racking my brains. I don't remember this kid playing in the first game. Like, where did this kid come from? Because I did watch a little bit of the Duke NC State game before that got out of hand, and it felt like Stewart had his hand on the ball, like defensively. Every time I turned and looked up, it was something Stewart was doing, whether altering a shot or getting a rebound or. So I was like, okay, maybe Duke's got something they can deal with in the paint. But again, Carolina to me is just a bad matchup for Duke. Like Arizona's the same way to me, where it's just it's just a bad matchup. And every once in a while you run across teams like that. For me, UConn's a bad matchup for Carolina. Like it's just something about the way the matchups are. It just doesn't fit right in terms of them having a smooth game. And before we get to Duke, though, I did want to go back a game back further, the NC State game. Anything from that performance that you want to touch on? Because was that the game that RJ went off for the 42?
That was Miami.
Yeah.
Miami, I'm sorry. Let me go back to Carolina's schedule here, because who went off in that who went off in the NC State game? Somebody had a really good game against NC State. I'm trying to, because State kind of tried to come back a little bit in the second half of that game, but I think the experience of this year's Tar Heel team really kind of helped them out. It was Ingram and Cadeau. That's what it was. Ingram had 22 points. Yeah.
The difference is Carolina couldn't put away State in the first half, and then State had the big run toward the end of the first half to take a lead. They weren't having it against Notre Dame. The big run in the first half, they took control. They put the foot on the gas, and it was over. And they could have very easily done that against State, but they for whatever reason, couldn't do it. But it was good to see against Notre Dame.
Do you think Kevin Keatts is back next year for NC State? Because especially the way they've looked the past couple of games, it kind of felt like he was coaching for his job. And the Wolfpack, they're 17-12. They're 9-9 in conference play. They shot 22% in the second half. That's what it was. They went 0 for 15 to start off the second half. They could not hit anything, and Carolina just went out ahead for a little bit. And then I don't know. It feels like they needed to win a couple of these games. It feels like they need to win a couple of games in the ACC tournament to save Kevin Keatts' job, because they did make the NCAA tournament last year.
He's got 2 more years on his contract, and the buyout is not inexpensive. I know if you asked the State fan base in general, they would say that they're done with him. But
they're fickle anyway. Like they probably were done with him after he lost in the tournament last year. Like, we're done with Kevin Keatts. So it's
so unless some of the big wigs want to write a big check, I don't think he's going to get fired.
So I don't know. Maybe I always assume Keatts would really use the transfer portal, and I'm kind of waiting for NC State to realize that they're NC State. And by that I mean they're kind of this, like, I wouldn't call them a blue blood, but they're kind of this dormant hot spot for basketball. And it's been a long time, like even before I was born, for when they were really like the spot in the state of North Carolina for basketball. But you would think somebody would come along and be like, hey man, this is NC State. Like, let's get this thing together. Let's figure out an NIL department. Let's attract in North Carolina high school kids to come here for like some kind of plan. And like, they don't really have one. It doesn't feel like they're just kind of slapping the team together every year. And then you have Wake Forest, where after beating Duke, the biggest win in Steve Forbes' career, everybody talking about storming the court and all this other stuff. I don't know if they've won a game since then. I think they've lost every game since then. Like they've lost 3 straight.
They lost to Notre Dame. They lost to Georgia Tech at home.
Yeah, and they had not lost at home.
Right.
So, the kid Ndongo hit a floater with 0.4 seconds left, and Georgia Tech after traveling, and Wake Forest loses 70-69 in a game that might have knocked Wake Forest out of the NCAA tournament, unless they figure something out. Yeah, I'm right. They've lost 3 straight since they beat Duke. They lost at Notre Dame. They lost to that Notre Dame team we saw last night. They lost to Notre Dame. They lost at Virginia Tech, and they lost at home to Georgia Tech. And they've got Clemson Saturday at 6:00. Shout out to the ACC for basically not caring what time these games are getting played, because you got Carolina Duke at 6:30. You got Wake and Clemson at 6. Why couldn't they push that a little earlier? Like, I think they knew that Duke and Carolina were playing on Saturday, and that game is actually important, because if I pull up the standings right now, Carolina's in first. Duke's a game behind. Then you got Virginia in third, and they're at 12-7. Then there's a glut with Clemson, Pittsburgh at 11-8. Syracuse and Wake. Syracuse is 11-9. Wake is 10-9. And then the others after that. So really, you don't have to worry about after Wake Forest, because then it's Virginia Tech at 9-10, State at 9-10, and then it goes down from there. But it's that little piece right there: Clemson, Pittsburgh, State, Wake Forest. Out of those four, RL, you said you had just finished writing a column about the tiebreakers and stuff for Carolina and Duke.
Right. If Carolina loses to Duke, they could still be the number one seed if Pittsburgh beats State and Wake Forest beats Clemson, because they'll go to Virginia first, and they both beat Virginia. So at that point, it would go to Pittsburgh, and Carolina beat Pittsburgh while Duke split. So Carolina would get the number one seed, but obviously, nobody in that program is thinking that way. They want to beat Duke.
First, so does that mean? So we need to root for Pittsburgh to finish fourth,
right?
Tiebreaker wise, is that the only one out of those groups of those three: Clemson, Pittsburgh, Syracuse, Wake? Is it only Pittsburgh that has to finish fourth for us to win the tiebreaker, or is there another?
Right, because if it's Clemson, they lose that tiebreaker.
Okay, same for. Well, we beat Wake. Again, I don't have any faith in Wake beating Clemson, even though it is at home. It's at the Joel. They should beat Clemson, but so either way, Carolina handles business on Saturday. None of this matters. They're just the outright regular season champs, and they're the 1 seed going into the tournament next week. Some questions from some viewers. John Kramer watching this live. Appreciate that, John. Says, can we still get a number 1 seed in the NCAA tournament? I was looking at that. I think the first three are locks. It's Purdue, UConn, and Houston. Yeah, those three I think are going to be 1 seeds regardless. Then it's like a group of, right now they have Arizona in that last one. But then right behind them is Tennessee and us. And I feel like if Arizona stumbles in the next 7 days in the Pac-12 tournament or whatever, don't make it to the finals or semifinals, and say Carolina wins the ACC, I would think Carolina would leapfrog Tennessee and take that 4th 1 seed, considering Carolina beat Tennessee earlier in the year pretty convincingly. Same with Tennessee. If Tennessee wins the SEC, I could see them giving Tennessee a 1 seed. Who deserves it? Probably Arizona, to be honest. They've played pretty well all year. Or Carolina. Carolina's played, over the whole body of work, Carolina's played pretty well, and they've beaten a number of top 25 teams all year. I would hope that Carolina gets it. But then again, even if they're like the top 2, as long as they start in Charlotte, I'm cool. And it looks like that's going to happen regardless, because of the way they do the seeding now, and that it can be different regions crushed together in a certain spot for fans to come in. Although they kind of screwed Greensboro last year by not putting Duke there, and they ended up putting like Kentucky, I believe it was, that came to Greensboro last year, and some teams, teams were from here.
Regardless of which region, I think Charlotte is going to get Tennessee and North Carolina.
Makes the most sense. I imagine that means they're in the East or the Southeast, I guess, regions. So,
well, a lot of the projections have Carolina as the 2 seed in the East, where UConn's the 1 seed.
I don't want to be there.
That's motivation enough to get 1 seed, so you get away from UConn.
Yeah, UConn is the only team, literally, in the whole country where I'm like, I don't really want to see them again, because I already saw them one time. I don't know if I want to play them again. I'm not even worried about Houston, and Houston's a fantastic team. I'd love to see Carolina Purdue. Baycott against Edie, like, yeah, I'm here for that. I'll watch that. But yeah, UConn, I don't want to, and it's not like they're invincible. They're not 1990 UNLV or anything like that. But just for this year, it feels like they've been the best team. Would y'all agree, or is there another team you would say is your de facto in your head best team going into postseason?
I like UConn. I think Purdue's also really good. I don't have any problem. I mean, you want to delay it as much as possible, but I have no problem if we matched up with UConn at some point. Like you said, I think they're beatable. They're very well coached and very good. But it's really about who's playing well in the tournament. Once we get in there, if we can get on a little streak, I think we could take the whole thing. But it takes a little bit of luck at that point sometimes.
Play rather play UConn in Arizona than in Boston, though.
Yeah, that's very true. I don't want to play them anywhere up in the Northeast because it'll just be like it was when we played them. It'll just be like the UConn home game, pretty much. So yeah, definitely don't want that. How important do you think winning the ACC tournament is nowadays to guys like Hubert Davis or John Shire, where when they played in the league was a different league, and it meant a lot, especially to their coaches. Do you feel like Hubert and John feel the same way about the ACC tournament as, say, the predecessors did in terms of Coach K and Roy Williams? Or is this just a different era? There's 15 teams. You got to get through 5 days of this just to get to the final. It's not the same as rolling the TV into my classroom on Friday for ACC quarterfinal Friday, and either Carolina or Duke's playing at noon because they're the 1 seed. So it's just different than it used to be. Do you think that they still put a lot of weight on winning this tournament?
I don't have any firsthand knowledge other than I know Coach Hubert, and I know that he's going to want to win those games, but I think he's going to downplay the importance of it as far as their ultimate goal. Obviously, is to go on and get to the NCAA and advance in that. But I think he's going to want to win. I mean, that you can't underestimate his competitiveness. He's fairly competitive and fiery out there. He wants to win these games. I think from a team standpoint, it just makes it a little bit better to go into the tournament, the NCAA tournament, with a little bit of momentum, I think. So that's my take.
Yeah, I think Hubert made it very clear that he's extremely passionate about regular season title, and obviously he's got a share of it, but he wants it all. And I think he seems to be of the same mind as Roy Williams in putting more stock in that than the tournament title, but obviously he wants to win that one as well.
I don't understand this question from John. What is Hubert Davis coaching grade for this year? Not grade for this season. Do you think he's a keeper long term? Yes, John. He ain't going nowhere. I never understood why people thought he was on the hot seat last year. He's not coaching his team. He's coaching another coach's team. This is the first year where he's actually had his hands on the entire roster. And what was the narrative the past 2 years? Hubert doesn't know how to use his bench. Hubert needs to use his bench more. Why didn't he use his bench? He's only playing 5 players. Well, now we see why, because the bench wasn't very good. I'm sorry. It just wasn't good. It wasn't up to Hubert's standards of trusting them on the court. And I look at the people he has now. I was thinking about this last night, actually. Jalen Winters, although he hasn't really he's actually played pretty well the past couple of games. He's an upgraded Dontrez Styles for the most part. That's what he is. Seth Trimble is better than he was last year. Jalen Washington is better than he was last year. The guys they brought in are starting. Harrison Ingram, Cormac Ryan. Those guys are better than what we had in those spots last year. So, he was able to see the problems in the roster, correct it. And to be honest, I think Hubert should be a candidate for National Coach of the Year for the job they've done, considering where they were last year and the complete flipping out of the roster. I don't know who else. Maybe Hurley at UConn, but I feel like Hubert should be considered National Coach of the Year for what they've done, especially if they win the ACC outright. You sweep Duke, you sweep NC State. You lose one game at home all year. You've got, I think, more top 25 wins than the other team, 5 or 6 or something like that. What's the argument for Hubert not to be the not just ACC coach, but National Coach of the Year? I really feel like he should be considered, and I don't know if he will.
Yeah, I mean, certainly ACC Coach of the Year. I guess Kelvin Sampson's going to get some consideration, but
Houston, yeah. Who else in the ACC besides Hubert would you give consideration to, since we're at the end of the year?
You mentioned it from where they came last year, and to have this team to be a already regular season champ. I'm sold that his message is getting across this year's team. They've played better. They're playing harder. They're playing together, and it starts with the coach. I mean, it really does, and you got to give them credit for how they got through this the year so far. I don't think there's anybody else in the race in the conference.
Yeah, I would agree. And they mentioned it. I think Corey Alexander mentioned it on the TV broadcast last night, where the team you can tell that they enjoy playing with each other, and we've echoed that here on the show. There was one, I think RJ Davis hit like a 3 or something and got fouled on it and got up and did a little inside joke celebration or whatever, and 2 or 3 teammates came over and did the same thing, and Corey Alexander noticed it and was like, that's a sign that guys get along off the court, that they're hanging out off the court, they're eating together, they're working out together, they're going to movies together. It's a thing, and it's crazy because when you watch Carolina, it feels like they've been together for 3 years. Like, they feel really close. This team just got put together in July last year or whatever. Like, they've only been together, they haven't been together a full year, but it feels like they're a pretty tight-knit bunch, and that goes so far because sometimes I'll watch Duke play and I feel like they don't seem as tight as you would think a Duke team would be. They feel like they're still kind of put together, and they'll have little runs where they're playing really well, but then they'll have runs where they get really frustrated, and it shows like on camera. Filipowski in general, I'm going to see a little stretch where he's just not happy with what's going on. Moving over to the Duke Carolina matchup on Saturday, Pete, you're the only one here that knows what it feels like to play in Cameron Indoor Stadium. Can you describe stepping out on that court? Because I don't think people realize how small Cameron Indoor Stadium actually is until you're actually in there. And then with 10,000 people surrounding you.
Yeah. It is an amazing experience. And I tell somebody, I think last night, I think on the post game, it's for an athlete, first of all, that is the ultimate. It's actually a goal or a dream to play in a place like that. You don't have any hesitation or fear about going into any arena and where it's going to be too loud or that's something that I remember going in. Even as a younger player and as I played throughout the years, you can't hear yourself, right? It's just so noisy. You're almost the air shaking. And you really don't even notice that part as much as you're dialed in and you're competitive and you're playing the game. It's just like playing when you get into these major arenas, you got to be able to just have that focus that you're locked into the game and what you're trying to do. I think this team is going to relish this chance to go into Durham. I know every time we went over there, we felt like that was going to be a fun game. And generally, it was really fun and competitive. And I think this team's going to go in there with the same attitude. It is intimidating to an average fan because it just looks crazy and so loud. But those guys on the court and those players and those coaches, they're locked in, and that stuff really doesn't affect them. You may have some stuff with some free throws here and there that maybe something can get a little bit emotional for a player trying to score or something. But by and large, during average gameplay, it's a thrill to play in that kind of environment.
Narl, you've been there, of course, on a reporting aspect. What's it like sitting on press row? There are kids painted in blue behind you, dripping paint onto your shirt while you're trying to report on this game. How hard is it to focus as a reporter in there while all this nonsense is going on during the Carolina?
You don't wear your best clothes to cover a Duke game, that's for sure. And you have the knees of a student behind you. And I'll just give you one example. I was covering Florida State and Duke there one year when Charlie Ward was playing. Charlie Ward was getting ready to do an inbounds pass right in front of me. And there was a male student behind me who in very explicit terms asked if his football coach performed a certain act on him, and he didn't even flinch. It was, and that's just how it is, though.
They're so coordinated. That's the thing I hate most about them. They're so coordinated, and like everything is all the Cameron crazies. They have like call sheets with like what to chant and all this other stuff. It's just everybody's got little nicknames, and it's like, but like I don't. Again, lately I hadn't felt that way about the Duke team. It's been the Duke fans that the animosity has shifted towards. Whereas when I was younger, it was the Duke players. It was Coach K. Like I did not care for them. But they don't stay long enough for me to develop that type of hatred. Now, Filipowski, by staying an extra year, he entered that door of the next one. Are you the next Duke guy that everyone's going to just start hating or whatever? And of course, it didn't help with the court storming thing from the other week with Wake Forest and him breaking his leg or whatever happened. But yeah, he was still able to play a couple days later and all that nonsense. Do they still do Krzyzewskiville outside since he retired?
Oh yeah, they do.
Oh, that's amazing. How long does that go on? Like, when does that start?
I think they're camping out there for Carolina tickets for about a month, which is
Wow.
crazy.
Hey, lucky for them, global warming's going on because we haven't had any snow or ice in like 2 years. So they've been out there camping in 60-degree weather, as opposed to I've seen some foot back in the day where they're out there in snowstorms and they're sitting out there on their laptops trying to study in like hurricane type weather. And it's just crazy. But once the game finally gets here, again, I think it's, to me, it's the greatest rivalry in sports because you're not going to really find another rivalry where it's close both sides. Usually one side dictates the other in terms of wins in a rivalry, whether it's Alabama,
State Carolina,
State Carolina, maybe in the 70s, but it hasn't. Carolina and NC State really hasn't been a rivalry since the 80s, maybe. I don't, because State's been down really ever since Valvano, really. Like, it just, maybe when Pete was playing. Like, do you guys consider them the same level of rivalry when you were playing, Pete, as a Duke? Because Duke was kind of just coming up when you were playing.
Yeah, never the same as Duke. And there's just, like you mentioned, there's just certain hatred that went with Duke and the coaches and the players because of how long they stayed there. I think State was probably more of a competitive atmosphere at some point. That has kind of waned a little bit. And like you mentioned, Alabama, Auburn, it seems like these days it's Carolina and State's the underdog, and it could be a good game, but they're generally not both highly ranked at the same time. We don't see Carolina
or the State at all a lot of times. I mean, in terms of that, you're right. I mean, the level is different. The level of talent with Carolina is different than State. Just the overall perception of the programs is different. Whereas with Duke, like I said, they're kind of, Duke and Carolina spot each other, like in the weight room. Like if they're both good, that's good for the league. If one of them is down, typically the league is looked at being down. And kind of the past couple of years with Carolina not being Carolina, that's kind of created perception in the ACC, in my opinion, that's kind of lingered over to now. But again, those teams behind Carolina and Duke, they're not doing the league any favors with losing these games the way that they're losing them. What do you think is going to be the key to the game on Saturday for Carolina to get out of Cameron with the win? Y'all mentioned the emergence of Sean Stewart from Duke coming off the bench to give him a little bit of rim protection. But who do you think are going to be the keys to the game for Duke that maybe didn't show up in that same capacity the first time? Who are you going to be looking at from the Duke side to really make a contribution here?
Well, for me, it's those three or four perimeter players they got there. I'm a little fearful with the environment at home and that home crowd that they're going to get into maybe a couple runs with some 3-pointers and transition buckets. They really, if you watch some of their games, they really have some guys that can knock it in from the outside, and we took that away for the most part. But those guys are dead-eye shooters, and if they get some momentum, we have some laps on defense. That could be a big run that it'd be hard maybe to come back from. So that's my fear: is they get a little run, they get a little momentum at home with their 3-pointers.
All right.
Yeah, I mean, Jared McClain has shown in recent games he can go on a bender. I mean, he had some really big scoring games, so need to hold him in check. Jeremy Roach has had a couple of good games of late, so they have guys who can go off. But I think if Carolina maintains the same defensive intensity it had Tuesday night at Duke, and why wouldn't they? I mean, it's the Duke game. Duke's going to have a hard time having that much success offensively.
I almost feel like Carolina, if the defense is back the way we've seen it the past couple of games, I think Carolina is starting to enter a territory where it doesn't really matter what the other team does. Like if Carolina's playing like this defensively and multiple guys are hitting threes, like everybody's getting involved, you have multiple double-digit scores, there's not a lot of teams in the country that are going to beat that in any given year. So I felt Duke is just a bad matchup. Well, Carolina's a bad matchup for Duke in terms of overall roster. I feel like they're just going to get frustrated trying to deal with everything Carolina can do. Now, Cameron is a different beast, probably the softest rims in America. And you're literally, the kids are on top of you at Cameron. Like, it looks like a high school gym. Like when you're watching it on TV, like it just looks so compacted and on top of it. Do you ever think Duke would ever build another basketball arena? No, because that thing's.
I don't think they're going to move anytime because there's too much tradition there. Of course, there was a lot of tradition at Carmichael and Reynolds, and
They're talking about the Smith Center, maybe build another one or renovating it or something. I'm like, where would you put another arena? And the Smith Center is not like it's falling apart. I think it's one of the biggest college basketball arenas in the country, and they're talking about building something else. Cameron's been there since when? Like the 30s?
30s or 40s.
Yeah, like World War II. Like it's been there for a long time. And still regarded as one of the top places. And I catch a lot of flack from my friends, but I'm like, on my bucket list is to see Carolina Duke at Cameron. Like that's actually on my bucket list of things to do I've never done before. And people joke with me because my firstborn, my daughter's name is Cameron, and they're just like, You're a closet Duke fan. I'm like, no, that's not what it is. Just coincidence. But I would love to go and watch a game in Cameron.
And as Paul remembers, the visiting dressing rooms like in a dungeon. Get out steps.
What? Hold on, wait. Describe this now. What's the visitor locker room like?
Well, go ahead, Pete.
But yeah, it's you walk in. I remember you just go down to the right, and it's like little. If I remember correctly, those little metal lockers. I mean, everything was primitive that you might see in a high school. Now that may be changed by now, but that was a while ago. But it's not the most spacious locker room.
And they love it. They love the whole thing about it. It's all the Duke mystique or whatever. But yeah, so anybody want to predict the score for Saturday, or are you staying off of that? With all the bets that going on in the state of North Carolina this week, nobody wants to throw
on. You can't bet till Monday.
That's true. Yeah,
we know it's on the 11th.
I like how they said it the week of the ACC tournament. That's going to be the beginning. Like as long as we got it in before this, then we're good to go. So, shout out to all the bet places that have bombarded my mailbox, email, Twitter, everything to convince me to go bet against my friends. Oh, that actually reminds me, I didn't even read the reads. We got two sponsors we need to read before we get out of here. And I apologize to Bleav because these are supposed to be read in the first couple of minutes of the podcast. First from BetOnline. BetOnline continues to be your number one source for all your basketball wagering needs, including pro and college hoops throughout the year. With up-to-the-minute odds, stats, and trends, you can follow your favorite team's path to the playoffs with in-game live betting, contests, and all the best player props. Experience the world's best wagering platform anytime from your desktop or your mobile devices. Head to BetOnline today to become part of the team, and remember to use promo code Bleav, BLEAV, for your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. BetOnline, the game starts here. And we also have a new sponsor. I personally love betting my friends and betting them on anything, sports games, who's fast. That's what Cut allows me to do. The Cut app is a peer-to-peer social betting platform that's legal in 40-plus states. Cut has customizable odds, tracking capabilities, and an entire social network with group chats, user profiles, and rewards. All payments, no need for Venmo. Use the promo code Bleav, BLEAV, for a 10% welcome deposit bonus. Don't forget the promo code Bleav. Cut, put your money where your mouth is. So if you want to bet on Duke, Carolina, I've not went to go check the line on this game yet. And actually, I don't know if is there a line for Duke, Carolina? I'm trying to go pull their thing before we get out of here. It's Wednesday. The game's Saturday. Of course, it's going to move between now and then. The line right now is actually Duke is favored in the matchup predictor on ESPN 70% to 28 or 71% to 28%. That seems really big. They don't have a line. Usually ESPN has a line sitting here. You would think with all the betting stuff ESPN is pushing, they would have the line sitting here, but they don't have a line on their game cast yet. So maybe it's too early. I won't predict this game because I've learned my lesson from previous years trying to figure out Duke, Carolina, and who's going to do what. But I will say this is probably one of the more confident I've felt going into Cameron in a while, maybe since 2019. And that team was a monster that we were going to go see. So I feel okay. I feel okay with Carolina going into Cameron and sweeping. That's what I want. I want to sweep. We haven't had a sweep from Duke. And when was the last time we swept Duke? Do you remember, RL?
I don't remember off the top of my head.
It's been a minute. And I think they swept us last year, if I'm not mistaken. So, so payback. Time to get in there and do that thing. Anything you guys want to say before we get out of here for the week?
Well, I would talk about, what you guys saw with Armando. He seemed to keep his emotions in check all day. He said he kept his emotions in check during the game. But when he started talking to us after the game, he was tearing up. He was dabbing his eyes with his shirt a couple of times because it finally hit him that it was his last home game. And it was really interesting to see all the emotions come out because he finally hit him, what had just happened. And he talked about how he would miss us. Boy, we're going to miss him. He's probably the best quote since Theo Pinson, and he's always honest with us and tell us about anything. I don't think we would have known about the players-only meeting after Georgia Tech if he hadn't told us. He just he's been terrific, and the whole press corps. I speak for all of them. We're going to miss Mondo.
Yeah, and Jones touched on it last night. That it's almost a unique era that he represents. He was a Roy Williams guy. He came in with Cole Anthony. That one seems like forever ago.
Wow, yeah.
His class and RJ went through the pandemic. We're out of it now. I mean, the whole thing, that whole era that they went through is kind of historic. I think we'll look back at it and just at a little different eye because of the challenges that college basketball went through, and Armando was our rock during all of that. So it's pretty cool. It's definitely emotional when you do realize you're not going to be out there again on that home floor. And he did handle it well in the game, but I can see how you would definitely get a little bit emotional after the game.
You're absolutely right, because Armando represents something really cool in terms of he was on the team that beat Coach K his final home game. He was on the team that beat Coach K in the only Final Four that Carolina and Duke have ever met in. He's the leading rebounder in Carolina history, which is a huge feat for if you look at the names that he had to pass to get to number one. And he did it in 4 years, because I see people going, oh, well, he should be the leading rebounder. He's been there for 12 years. He did it last year. So, there's no little thing there saying he had an extra year or whatever. And I've heard Armando say it's not how many years you're here, it's how many games you've actually played, like how many minutes you've actually played. Because people forget Armando was kind of hurt a little bit beginning of his career. He didn't play full seasons freshman and sophomore year due to injury. So I don't know if it's so much the 5 years or whatever, but some Duke fans, it's weird how things have changed, because I hear people clowning him for being here for so long. Why wouldn't you want to be? Why would you not want to be big man on campus at the University of North Carolina in basketball for as long as you can? What's the problem here? I don't understand. People go to school for 5 years all the time in college. He's already graduated or whatever. So it's I don't understand the logic with the Duke fans going, oh, well, he's been there so long. And it's well, your kids are there 8 months. And look what happens every year. So I don't know. I just thought that was strange.
But Mondo was also pretty reflective. I mean, he remembered coming in as a freshman and Roy Williams telling him he's going to have to get better. And he was getting emotional just talking about how a lot of players would have transferred, but he hung in there and can't believe that he's where he is now, considering where he was then. So, and he had a couple of times. I mean, his freshman season was the Cole Anthony season, didn't go too well. Last season obviously didn't go too well. So he's had highs and lows for sure. Yeah,
this is the first year, really. It's really the first year he's been in a Carolina uniform where Carolina's really felt like Carolina. To your point, that Cole Anthony year was kind of odd. The year after that was a little odd. Last year was odd. And really, if it wasn't for them getting hot, 2 years ago, was it 2 years ago? 3 years, 2 years ago? If it wasn't for them getting hot around about this time and rattling off a bunch of wins, that season would have been weird too. So this is the first time he's gotten a chance to experience the Carolina, experience properly from beginning of season to end, being in the top 10, being in the top of the ACC, all the accolades that come with that. So I love Armando Bacot. I do feel like he's one of the ones that loves Carolina a lot as a player. He'll represent it well going forward. I don't know what the future holds for him going forward, maybe overseas, maybe he latches onto an NBA team. I have no idea, but I appreciate what he's done for Carolina and love the fact that he's been with Carolina the past 5 years and did not transfer like a lot of other kids would have done in the same situation. We are going to get out of here. Carolina Duke is Saturday at 6:30 p.m. on ESPN. I'd imagine College Game Day is going to be at Cameron on Saturday. They will. last 5 games, Carolina's 5-0. Last 5 games for Duke. Duke is 4-1. That Wake Forest loss is the only blemish they've had, and that was back on February 24th. So should be a good one. They always deliver, like Jay Billis says. Greatest rivalry in sports, in my opinion. We'll be back next week to recap that and to get you ready for the start of the ACC tournament, because by the time you see us again, we'll have an idea of who won the ACC regular season and who ended up in 4th place. A lot of nonsense can happen on Saturday with those other teams we were talking about. So still kind of up in the air. Can Carolina win this outright or not? We'll get you ready for that. We'll get you ready for the ACC tournament, and we'll finally get a chance to kind of look towards seeding for March Madness and figure out the best path for Carolina. So getting ready for second season. So everybody's just strap on, get ready for Carolina Duke on Saturday. For Pete Chilcutt, for RL Bynum, this is Desmond Johnson. You've been watching and listening to the Bleav in Heels Hoops podcast here on Bleav Podcast Networks.